Haarlem, the Netherlands, 1943. A 16-year-old girl pedals her bicycle through the streets, ribbons in her hair. A German soldier walking beside her. He's laughing at something she said. Around them, the occupied city goes about its evening. Cafes, checkpoints, collaborators. She met him only an hour ago, smiled at his jokes, suggested somewhere quieter. Through the woods, just the two of them. He agreed without hesitation. They always do. 50 meters behind them, another bicycle rolled quietly through the dimming evening light. The rider was smaller, younger, dark hair like her sister's, 14 years old. She kept her distance, but never lost sight of them. As they turned off the paved road towards the trees, neither girl spoke. They didn't need to. They did this before, many times. The woods swallowed both the young girl and the Nazi soldier. The older sister dismounted her bicycle, leaned it against a tree. She let the soldier move closer. He was still talking, confident now, thinking he understood what was happening. She smiled at him, took a step back, deeper into the shadows. The gunshot cracked through the silence like a branch, snapping. The soldier's body hit the ground before the echo faded. The 16-year-old girl didn't flinch. Her younger sister stepped out from behind a tree, pistol still raised, face expressionless. No tears, no shock, no visible emotion at all. They had just killed a soldier in cold blood. The older sister checked the body quickly, professionally, confirmed that he was dead. The younger one was already moving back to her bicycle. They had perhaps 10 minutes before anyone came looking. Maybe less. They pedaled away, two young teenage girls on bicycles. Quickly, they disappeared into the meandering streets and canals in the city of Haarlem. This wasn't a crime of passion. This wasn't self-defense. This was a calculated execution, carried out by children. The girls were Freddie and Truus Oversteegen, 14 and 16 years old, sisters. And this was just one of dozens of times they used what the Dutch resistance called the Bicycle Honeytrap. The strategy was designed to kill Nazis and collaborators. Let that sink in for a moment. 14 and 16. Not 18. Not even close to adulthood by any measure. At 14, Freddie Oversteegen should have been in school, worried about homework and friendships and all the mundane concerns of adolescence. Instead, she was executing grown men in the woods and cycling home in time for dinner. Truus was only slightly older at 16, still a child under any definition, still years away from the age where societies typically allow people to vote, drink, sign contracts, or make life-altering decisions. But they were making the ultimate life-altering decision. They were deciding who lived and who died. They were civilians, young children, interfering in war. This is what makes their story so uncomfortable. We have laws against child soldiers for good reasons, international conventions, moral frameworks built over centuries. The idea of weaponizing children violates something fundamental about how we believe civilization should function. Children are supposed to be protected, not turned into assassins. But the Oversteegen sisters weren't kidnapped by warlords or brainwashed by extremists. They weren't forced. They volunteered in circumstances where the alternative was watching their country be destroyed by Hitler and his forces. They couldn't bear to just sit there and do nothing. They were given a choice that no child should ever have to make, and they made it without hesitation. The Dutch sisters were extraordinarily effective, precisely because they were so young, because nobody ever suspected them, because a teenage girl on a bicycle with ribbons in her hair could go anywhere, talk to anyone, lead a soldier into the woods, without triggering a single alarm in his head. Their innocence was their weapon, and using it destroyed something in them that never really healed. This wasn't just two sisters. These were two normal teenage girls who became something else entirely. Before the war, they were ordinary, poor, yes, politically aware, because of their mother. But ultimately, They were two ordinary Dutch girls, living ordinary lives. Then the war came, and ordinary wasn't an option anymore. The girls were Freddie and Truus Oversteegen, and this was just one of the dozens of times they killed a German soldier. That they implemented what resistance fighters called the Bicycle Honeytrap. To understand how two teenage girls became executioners for the Dutch resistance, you have to go back before the war, before the occupation, before everything turned dark. Truus Oversteegen, born in 1923, was the older sister. She was 16 years old when she first killed someone. In the photographs that survive from before the war, she appears as a confident young woman, with sharp eyes. She had the kind of face that suggested she didn't suffer fools, outspoken, practical. She was the natural leader between the two sisters, the one who made the decisions and didn't look back. Freddie Oversteegen, born in 1925, was 2 years younger, 14, when she fired her first shot. Quieter, more observant, with a face that made her look even younger than she was, almost childlike. It was the perfect disguise, though no one planned it that way. She was just a kid who happened to look completely harmless. It was her innocent looks that made her the perfect weapon. Their mother was the source of everything that followed. Trintje van der Molen, working class, communist, and fiercely anti-fascist. In an era when those politics could get you killed, she raised her daughters alone, after divorcing their father. Unusual for the time, especially because she raised them with a moral framework that was absolute. You help people who need help. You fight injustice when you see it. You don't look away. You intervene to make things right again. Before the war, their small house in Haarlem had sheltered refugees, Jewish families fleeing Germany, political dissidents, people with nowhere else to go. Trintje fed them, hid them, and moved them along to safer locations. Her daughters watched and learned that resistance wasn't something you talked about. It was something you did. When the Germans invaded the Netherlands in May 1940, the Oversteegen family wasn't surprised. They'd been expecting it. What surprised them was how quickly the country fell. Just 5 short days. The Wehrmacht rolled through Dutch defences like they weren't even there. Queen Wilhelmina and her family fled to London. The government collapsed. The long German occupation began, and with it came the persecutions. Jews were registered, businesses were confiscated, freedom of movement was restricted, people disappeared in the night. The Dutch Nazi Party, the NSB, collaborated enthusiastically with the occupying German forces. Suddenly, your neighbor might be the one reporting you to the Gestapo. The Oversteegen sisters weren't going to just sit around and watch their country get crushed by Hitler and his forces. They saw their mother's network of refugees and resistance contacts get rounded up, arrested, shot. The injustice wasn't abstract. It was the innocent family they'd hidden last month, now deported to the camps. It was the man who'd helped move Jewish children to safety, now hanging from a lamppost with a sign around his neck. They were angry, and unlike most people, they were about to get an opportunity to do something about it. The knock on the door came later, in 1943. A man stood there, middle-aged, unremarkable, the kind of face you'd forget immediately. He asked for their mother by name. He spoke quietly, and the girls were sent out of the room. But they weren't sent far. They listened. The man was from the Council of Resistance, one of several Dutch resistance organizations fighting the occupation. He needed operatives, people the Germans wouldn't suspect. He'd heard about the family's work, the political connections. He knew the family was reliable. He needed her daughters. There was a long silence. Then the mom called the girls back into the room. The man looked at them with barely concealed skepticism. 2 teenage girls, one barely into adolescence. He'd been expecting something else. But the resistance was desperate. The Germans were too good at identifying male operatives, too efficient at infiltrating networks. They needed people who could move invisibly through checkpoints, who could be in places that would raise no suspicion. Girls fit that description perfectly. The conversation that followed wasn't dramatic. It was practical. Could they ride bicycles long distances? Yes. Could they keep secrets? Obviously, they'd been doing that for years. Could they follow orders precisely, without improvisation? Truus said yes immediately. Freddie nodded in silent agreement. Could they kill? That's when the room went quiet. The man explained what he was asking. This wasn't about carrying messages or distributing newspapers, though they'd do that too. The resistance needed people eliminated. German soldiers, Dutch collaborators, NSB members who were too effective at hunting resistance fighters, people who needed to die so others could live. And because these people were soldiers, because they were alert, armed and suspicious, the resistance needed to make them vulnerable, distracted, led somewhere isolated, where an ambush would work. Young women could do that. Pretty girls on bikes, who seemed totally harmless, who could flirt, who could suggest a walk, who could lead a soldier into the woods where he'd never walk out. This wasn't patriotism he was selling. This was cold-blooded murder. Necessary murder. Justified murder. But murder nonetheless. Could they do it? Truus looked at her mother. Her face was impossible to read, but she didn't say no. This was the world they lived in now. The Germans had made the rules. You either resisted or you collaborated. And collaboration meant accepting atrocity. Truus confidently said, yes. Freddie, 14 years old, watching her older sister, said yes too. Their childhood ended in that moment. Not that it hadn't been ending already, bit by bit, as the occupation ground on. But this was the final break. They were soldiers now, unlisted, unacknowledged, unpaid, but soldiers nonetheless. They reported for their first underground resistance training the next week. Executing the Bicycle Honeytrap wasn't complicated. Simplicity was the point. Step 1. The disguise. Ribbons in their hair. Nice dresses. The kind young women wore to churches or social events. Bicycles, ubiquitous in the Netherlands, completely unremarkable. They weaponized their own innocence. Nobody suspected teenage girls. The German soldiers certainly didn't. Step 2. The approach. Bars, cafes, town squares, anywhere the Nazis congregated. Truus was better at this part. She was naturally outgoing, confident, the kind of girl who could strike up a conversation with anyone. The young Freddie was quieter, but present. The soldiers never focused on her anyway. She was too young, too childlike, just the annoying little sister. Step 3. The lure. Flirting wasn't hard. Lonely soldiers, far from home, occupying a hostile country. They were desperate for friendly contact. A pretty girl, paying attention, they'd follow her anywhere. The line was always some variation of the same thing. Want to go for a walk? I know a nice spot, more private. They always said, yes. Men are all the same. Step 4. The ambush. Lead them into the woods, into an alley, somewhere isolated, to a place where the resistance had positioned armed men. Sometimes it was partisans with guns. Sometimes it was the girls themselves, waiting until the soldier was distracted, when their victim was at their most vulnerable, not expecting anything. One shot, usually to the back of the head. Quick, clean. The body would be hidden or left as a message, depending on the operation's goals. The girls would bicycle away. They were just two teenagers out for a ride, at the wrong place at the wrong time, and when the Germans eventually found the body, they were already long gone. They did this dozens of times. The exact number isn't recorded. The resistance didn't keep neat ledgers of assassinations, but both sisters, in interviews decades later, confirmed it was dozens, not 5 or 6, dozens. Collaborators, German soldiers, Dutch Nazis who'd sold out their neighbors. Everyone who worked on the side of Hitler was a target. And they didn't just do the honey trap. That was their specialty. But the resistance used them for just about everything. They sabotaged railway lines, unscrewing bolts and loosening tracks so trains would derail. They transported Jewish children to safe houses, hidden in crates on their bicycles, or walking hand in hand, pretending to be family. They distributed illegal newspapers, the underground press that kept Dutch morale alive. This was the newspaper that spread crucial information about Allied advances. They worked with Hannie Schaft, the girl with the red hair, one of the most famous resistance fighters in Dutch history. Hannie specialized in ambushing Nazi officers on the street, shooting them in broad daylight, quickly disappearing into crowds. She was caught and executed just weeks before the war ended, becoming a national martyr. The Oversteegen sisters, doing the same work, somehow survived, but survival came with a price neither of them fully understood until it was too late. The impact of the Oversteegen sisters on the German occupation was both tactical and psychological. Tactically, they were effective. The soldiers and collaborators they killed weren't random. The resistance targeted people who mattered. A German officer who'd overseen a massacre. A Dutch policeman who'd betrayed Jewish families into deportation. Removing these people saved lives, disrupted German operations, and bought time for other resistance activities. But the psychological impact on the enemy forces was larger. The Germans couldn't stop them. Every security measure, every checkpoint, every identification check was designed to catch male operatives, adult men moving with purpose. 2 teenage girls on bicycles they sailed through. They were invisible. The ultimate threat came from the least threatening source. That created paranoia among the Nazis. If teenage girls could be assassins, who else? The baker? The old woman on the corner? The kid delivering newspapers? The occupation depended on the Dutch population being passive, controllable. The Oversteegen sisters, and others like them, proved that passivity was an illusion. Anyone could be dangerous. Anyone could be part of the resistance. The consequences of this mindset were massive. Germans responded with collective punishment. Villages where resistance operated were burned to ashes. Hostages were shot. Reprisals were brutal. The resistance knew this would happen and factored it into their calculations. Every dead German soldier, every killed collaborator, it was worth the reprisal if it saved more lives in the long run, or if it delayed hostile German operations. The Oversteegen sisters lived with that calculus. Every trigger pull meant someone else might die in retaliation. They did it anyway. But the cost wasn't just to others. She compartmentalized, shut it away, became the soldier who didn't think about the faces, didn't remember the sounds, just moved forward to the next mission. In interviews after the war, she spoke about the killings matter-of-factly, without emotion. It was war. People died in wars. They'd done what needed doing. She never said it was easy, just necessary. Freddie couldn't do that. Freddie was 14 when she fired her first shot, still a child, despite everything. And unlike Truus, she couldn't shut away what she'd done. She remembered the faces. She remembered the sounds of the bodies hitting the ground. She remembered the moment between pulling the trigger and the impact. The moment when it wasn't too late, when she could still choose not to do this. She never chose not to, but she never forgot either. After all, she was just a kid. In an interview decades later, her voice still quiet, she said, "I've shot a gun myself, and I've seen them fall. And what is inside us at such a moment? You want to help them get up. It has a counter effect on your soul." That quote captures everything about what the Oversteegen sisters were forced to become. They were teenagers who killed people and then wanted to help them get up. The cognitive dissonance of that, the moral weight, the psychological damage, stayed with them forever, especially Freddie. She suffered from what we'd now recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder. She felt the effects of this for the rest of her life. Nightmares, flashbacks, guilt that never went away, even though intellectually She knew what they had done was the right thing. Her sister could compartmentalize. Freddie drowned. The war eventually ended in May 1945. The Germans surrendered. The Netherlands was liberated. The Oversteegen sisters had survived. But surviving and living are different things. After the war, the heroic recognition you'd expect didn't come. The problem was politics. The Oversteegen family was communist. Their mother had been a party member, active in socialist politics. The sisters had fought for the resistance, yes, but they'd fought alongside communists, in communist-aligned resistance cells. And then the Cold War started. Suddenly, being communist in Western Europe was almost as bad as siding with the Nazis. The Dutch government, eager to align with the United States and NATO, didn't want to celebrate resistance fighters with the wrong political background. The Oversteegen sisters, who'd killed dozens of Nazis to liberate their country, were politically inconvenient, so they were ignored. No medals, no parades, no official recognition. Other resistance fighters, those with the right political connections, didn't receive this treatment. They were met with honors, pensions, and public acknowledgement. The Oversteegen sisters only received silence. They quietly went back to civilian life. Truus worked various jobs, married, and raised a family. She didn't talk much about the war. When she did, it was factual, unemotional. She'd done her duty. It was over. Freddie struggled more. She worked, she had relationships, but she was never fully present. Part of her was still in those woods, still pulling the trigger, still watching them fall. It wasn't until 2014, 69 years after the war ended, that the Dutch government finally awarded them the Mobilization War Cross, one of the highest honors the Netherlands can bestow for wartime service. Truus was 91 years old. Freddie was 89. The ceremony was quiet, almost apologetic. Better late than never, but only just barely. Truus died in September 2016. She was 92 years old. Freddie followed 2 years later, 92 years old as well. They'd survived the Nazis, survived the Cold War neglect, and died finally as recognized heroes. But the recognition for their patriotic acts came too late. They'd lived most of their lives as footnotes, dangerous women who'd done dangerous things. They had been quietly shuffled aside because they made the political narrative complicated. The legacy of Freddie and Truus Oversteegen isn't just about killing Nazis, though that's the dramatic part. It's the part of the story that makes headlines. Their real story is about courage taking unexpected forms. When people think of World War II heroes, they picture soldiers in uniform, partisans with rifles, pilots in cockpits of warplanes. They don't picture teenage girls on bicycles with ribbons in their hair. But those girls were just as deadly, just as effective, just as brave as any commando or pilot. The sisters had to become something completely contrary to their nature. Soldiers train for combat. They're prepared psychologically for killing. Freddie and Truus were children who had to learn murder as a skill set. They had to smile at men they intended to kill. They had to flirt, laugh, play the part of the harmless girl while leading someone to their death. That takes a kind of courage that's hard to even quantify. But their story is also about cost, the profound human cost of resistance. Truus could compartmentalize, but Freddie couldn't, and her suffering was the price of their effectiveness. She killed to save lives, and it destroyed something inside her that never really healed. That's the counter effect on the soul she spoke about. The moral injury that stays, even when the cause is justified. We like our war stories clean. Heroes who fight and win and come home whole. The Oversteegen sisters remind us that real resistance is messy, traumatic, and leaves scars that never fully fade. Freddie lived with those scars for almost 70 years. She never regretted fighting, but she never fully recovered from it either. Their resistance story is proof that the most unassuming people can become the most effective weapons against tyranny. That evil isn't defeated by grand armies alone, but by countless small acts of courage from ordinary people who refuse to accept the intolerable. 2 teenage girls on bicycles, ribbons in their hair, pistols in their bags. Just 2 old women who'd once been teenage girls. They had done the impossible and paid for it in ways most people will never understand. 2 unlikely Dutch heroes, but the kind of heroes who remind us that heroism isn't free, isn't clean, and isn't something you choose lightly. It's something you do because someone has to do it, and then you live with it forever. That's the real story, not just the dramatic honey trap, not just the body count. It's what ordinary people become when they refuse to look away from evil. It's the price they pay for that refusal. It's the scars that never heal, carried in silence, because speaking about them means reliving them. The next time you think resistance is romantic, remember Freddie Oversteegen, at 89 years old, still haunted by faces she'd seen fall, still wanting to help them get up, still living in those woods where her childhood ended and something darker began. That is what fighting tyranny actually costs. That is what heroes actually are.